let's see. I just hit record, so cool. All right, cool. Um, cool, man. Thank you, Jess Worby, illustrator, cartoonist, and educator. I believe so, if I'm correct. Thank you for taking the time to chat a bit on my series.
My pleasure. I mean, I'm really busy here.
Yeah. How are you?
Nice. No, it's my total, like, it's great to do this with you. Thank you, Robert, for having me.
Well, first, how has this like kind of affected like your flow, your workflow, and particularly like education wise in your students and classes? How is that? How is this whole situation like affected that aspect? I could imagine everybody had to kind of reimagine how classes would work and such like that.
Sure. Well, as an illustrator, it was totally fortunate that I picked up an iPad Pro a while back and had been getting myself more comfortable with working directly digitally, which years ago was one of those things I said I would never do for whatever reason. And now that I've done that 180, everything else has been sort of smooth. I in my own work, I'm drawing directly on there. I have paper. I can find paper occasionally, and just whenever I need to do something that feels spontaneous and just sort of weird that doesn't fit in a digital vein, I will draw on whatever I have. I've always been that way. I just doodle everywhere. One of the only times I remember really getting in trouble as a kid, I drew on the back of a school issue calculator. I was in 6th grade, which I was actually pretty good at math, but the teacher didn't take kindly to that, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
It was like why on this? I don't know. Teaching though, how's that for a transition?
Yeah.
So for me and then I became a teacher. So teaching for me, I teach currently at the New York Institute of Technology in their digital art and design program. I teach illustration, computer graphics, which is like a really great name for a class right now. It's just Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign, like intro to those types of programs. And and drawing and that kind of a thing, swinging both ways from analog to digital. So since the pandemic hit and students have been mostly in quarantine in the New York metro area, we've been fortunate in that the department has supplied some backup tablets and laptops and that kind of a thing to some of my students, which has been really cool. So everyone has been able to work for the most part digitally, which means that they can share what they're working with me pretty directly. We don't have to go through the whole rigmarole usually of, can you take the picture, hold it up to the screen or something like that. I teach some classes with younger kids when I'm not doing college work, and they're always holding it up, and it's like, they're like moving it around, and they have like a virtual background on, and it disappears in Zoom, that fun stuff. So there's all sorts of hiccups and weird things with teaching via Zoom and other platforms. But overall, I think it's better than completely cutting out, because if nothing else, even if they're not learning as deeply as they would have otherwise, people need connection, and students need to feel like they're moving forward with this thing that they set out to do a few years ago. To just be sitting around right now and not have, for me even, to have that work, a few days a week, it would make it that much tougher, I think. And I've gotten a number of emails from students saying, I'm sorry I wasn't in class, and I'm really just in a dark place, frankly, and stuff like that, with the ones who have opened up to me. And so those are just the ones who have told me that that's how they were feeling. I assume there were many more who were going through things. Students whose family have had the virus, and like the whole house was pretty bad, but now they're okay. Students who lost family members. It's hitting a lot of people really, really hardly, and having the privilege to just be away from it it creates a lot of weird guilt, I think, for me, but also being able to connect with these students and talk them through things and say, you know, now's not the time to expect masterpieces to flow out of you. Like, sure, trauma has created lots of great art in the past, but that shouldn't be your expectation. You should just focus on getting through this. It's okay to just survive and then like do the minimum sometimes, and then just like be a slug on the couch in your pajamas for a while. Like that is totally fine.
Yeah. Well, did you have to like, or did the school have to adjust a kind of like syllabi as well, or like schedule to like, or is it semesters there or trimesters, or did they have to shorten or kind of just nix some things as well, or?
It's semesters, and they didn't so much as change anything as much as tell the professors, these are the platforms that we will pay to use, you know, Zoom, etc. We'll give you seminars on these things if you are, you know, because there are all these professors who are like, you know, 70 years old, older, and they're just thinking like, oh my God, now I have to learn this entirely new way of thinking just for the next couple months.
Yeah.
You know, so I get that, but by the same degree, having the students be like, oh, the professor who can't figure out how to play a video on YouTube is now going to teach an entire class using this.
Yeah.
It's an interesting time to be in education for sure. But we didn't have to change that much. I hopped on Zoom immediately. I think it was March like 15th, somewhere around there. Maybe even before that. They called, I had a Monday class. We went in, a couple of the students were wearing masks, a couple of the students didn't show up. By Wednesday, they'd called it and we were shifting to Zoom. So I made the shift immediately rather than call out of class that week. And in general, I think educators have decided to dial back expectations, which is unusual because we usually say, you know, don't lower the bar, raise the student, you know, sort of a thing. Don't change expectations based on circumstances, but sometimes circumstances are sort of beyond what you would imagine they would be, to the point where it feels like we're living in some sort of dystopian teen fantasy novel or something.
Yeah, I totally, man. Like, kind of curious too, like with your courses in like say the illustration and digital work. How do you guys do you do group critiques or, you know, feedback with you know, via Zoom, or because as I recall, I've studied you know, graphic and web design, and it was super critical for that feedback and the critique, you know.
Yeah.
So how do you approach that via this? Is it just like a group session, I guess, or
yeah?
Do you do it?
I think that I do feedbacks. Listen to me. I do critiques. This is critiques. This is the art word.
Oh yeah.
Done many critiques, crits, if you want to just go with that.
Yeah.
Usually just at the end of a major project rather than every class. I suffered through art classes where it was just 4-hour long critiques, and just looking around the classroom, it was amazing to me that the professor didn't gauge the students' reactions and see that people were just clawing their eyes out. So for me, I generally keep it to an hour, a little bit more if I have to, if it's a really big class. But doing it online actually works fine for the most part, because you're able to share the screen and just say, as long as you ask the right questions that guide students to talk about unique aspects of that artwork and and remind them that you need to be constructive and all that good stuff, I think it works fine. I would say that main drawback right now is that the more reserved students who you can sort of draw out when you're there in person are even more reserved now.
Mm.
So without calling them out by name for being quiet during class, they just sort of will not interact, unfortunately.
That's kind of what I've noticed too. Regarding it, I've done like some super kind of like 20 people on Zoom, and it's like I haven't had the ability to talk or say. I'm like, well, to the point. I'm just like a floating head, you know, like
Yeah,
this weird, distorted Brady Bunch kind of thing going on. You know, it's like,
right. And if you're one of the quieter ones, you get pushed to the next screen.
yeah, yeah. It's
There are
like,
more than 9 people or whatever.
oh,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like chaos, you know. It's like, um, cool. Well, let's kind of go back then. And how did you get? Let's kind of just talk about how you got into illustration and this type of work, because it's kind of fascinating. I'm always curious about illustrators and why they kind of got into that. Because I'm just fascinated with the medium and that communication methods. And so,
Sure.
what? How did you get into it? Were you like, you know, at a young age? Were you reading something graphical and it was like boom, or how did you get into it?
I sort of ping ponged back and forth when I was younger between what my natural bent was and what I felt like I should be doing, which for a lot of, you hear a lot of artists say like, there's nothing else I could be doing. Like, this is my passion. This is the one thing for me. And I never felt that way. I felt pulled in a gazillion different directions. And as a result, it's like I have this voracious appetite to do everything. And I put off making a decision about specialization until the last minute generally. It's been the trend in my life. You know, oh, you have to pick a major. Okay, it's time. You know, oh, you have to pick a career. Okay, it's time. Which wasn't because I wasn't passionate about it. It's because I didn't want to cut other parts of my life out. And I knew, you know, once I started doing this, I wasn't gonna, you know, I'd love to go back to picking up languages. Like that was like a really fun thing for me, was learning languages and exploring linguistic stuff. But what I realized was, I'm trying to remember how old I was when I had this revelation. There are certain things that you enjoy for your entire life. And if you can't see that clearly, like some people can, then you have to go back and ask yourself, what has always attracted me? What has always fascinated me? What have I always been passionate about? And for me, that was pictures that tell stories. Not necessarily fine art, because I did study fine art for a time. And I had like a very mixed feeling about it, because on the one hand, I loved making things, but on the other, I was being told, stop trying to tell a story, stop making this so cartoony. All the stuff that cartoonists and illustrators are told when they're taking a fine art class, especially one that's like very theory based and sort of a modernist bent, where you're being told, well, have you tried something more abstract, more nonlinear? Have you tried, what if you just made an installation where there was some garbage in it for some reason? You know, that was, maybe this was just of the time. It was a little bit before like relational aesthetics came about, and like a bunch of other stuff was sort of percolating. But for me, I was like, I want to make stuff that speaks directly to people and doesn't try to be obtuse the way that a lot of fine art does. I wanted to draw things that came directly. I wanted to just take stuff from my brain and just put it on paper in as immediate a way as possible. So for a while, I was just using a Bic pen and copy paper or a sketchbook or whatever I had on hand, because any type of process beyond that, to me, I felt like I was losing something in translation. Because I wanted to draw things, and I still do, in a way that felt more like writing, where you were well, even more direct than writing, because even when we're tracking words in our brain, we're still translating from abstract thought into language. Wow, why did I just go there? I'm really going some places here. This is what happens. You should cut in probably before this goes any further.
I just let you go, man.
You shouldn't do it for that long.
I mean, well, to touch base, like I'm like that guy that like myself, I had to kind of, it took me, I'm about 35 in a couple of days, turning 35, but it took me this long to, you know, and I'm from Boston in the Massachusetts, but it it took me years to kind of evolve and understand that I love arts and and visual communications and visual language, because I have a degree in criminal justice, and then I went into graphic and
Wow.
web design, and then I was freelancing, for like financial firms and UX and stuff too, and then like couple years ago in 2016, I decided to pick up and move to, New York in Brooklyn, and found the camera. And then I started getting a lot of traction with my camera work, and it's been, you know, it's a constant evolution. So, and then I've started this kind of series just to kind of question if other creatives and like how they got to study, really identify with that medium or with their profession, how that evolution came to be, because I was like, how did I get here? Because it's like I
Yeah.
finally I, I
I ask
finally
myself that all the time.
yeah
How did I get here?
yeah it's like
It's
but yeah, I was always curious with like archaeology, and I was like when I was younger, I want to be like an
yeah,
archaeologist and like Indiana Jones, and I love museums, and it's just like I love that exploratory kind of artifacts, and discovering new things. So it's like, um, I don't know. I also love pen work, and I love like you like the detail in your work, and I'm fascinated with like how do you develop your style? Like how do you develop your line work?
sure.
Yeah.
That's a great question. I get a lot of students who are obsessed with the idea of style. I was obsessed with the idea of style. I still sort of, it's definitely still a preoccupation for me, even though I know that it's not a healthy one in some ways. Um, for me, it came about from from I think a lot of it came from a pretty intellectual angle, but then some of it also came just sort of intuitively. It's a combination,
Mm.
weirdly, where I was looking at a lot of work and doing master studies. I actually, to get back to your earlier question, when I was a kid, the thing that sort of stuck with me, I would draw from baseball cards. I would just copy the art, like the photo of a baseball card, and draw. And they're tiny, and I would get it as realistic as I could with like a magic marker or whatever I had on hand. And I got pretty good at working observationally that way without using guidelines. So that started to develop this sort of rough, loose way of working that I took with me for years, and I still have to some respect. And so it's funny because some people look at it and they're like, oh, this person, okay, they can't quite draw realistically. And it's like, and I'm not gonna like defend myself and show them the hyper realistic stuff that I've done, because I don't really care.
Mm.
But it is funny seeing like just different tastes collide, I guess. So I started drawing that way, where I was trying to replicate reality, and just weird stuff would happen, and I would let it happen. And then as a teenager, I discovered anime, as a lot of teenagers do, and it definitely opened my eyes to how much you could abstract features. I wouldn't have put those words to it then. This is me now.
Yeah.
But I was looking at, I was like, oh, the muscles and the eyes and all the proportions are so different. But I still didn't really like using rules and constraints to create things. I've always been very much about the freedom of being able to make anything, any experimental way that I want. And it's only been more recently that I've tied myself down more so that I can be consistent, which is important for a working illustrator. But from there, when I went to school, those professors were like, no, 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 like, we do not do this here. It's like, what is this? Why are the eyes like this? What is happening? All this spiky hair, whatever.
Yeah.
They were like, go back to reality. I was like, okay, I can draw from observation, no problem. And that was very attractive to people, whether it was with graphite or oil paint or acrylic or what have you. And from there, I was thinking like, okay, like this is fine. It didn't feel like enough to me in terms of, I just didn't get very much out of only drawing observationally. And there are people who do that, and that's fine. Like I had a friend say, what could be better than, like, reality does everything for you. You can't make up some of this stuff.
Mm.
And that's totally fair to have that viewpoint. But for me, I was like, I need to find my own idiosyncratic way forward of making things and then of telling stories. So the content and the style and all the pieces are weird and different, you know, in their own way. And I eventually started studying Art Brut and Basquiat and, you know, Jean Dubuffet and a bunch of artists like that who were working in a more childlike vein, which sort of blew my mind open. And I had a professor who was making me do hundreds of blind contour drawings, which I grew to really enjoy. Do you know that exercise where you draw someone with or something without looking at the paper?
I've tried that a few times, and it's like,
yeah. Generally, it's
Yeah.
done in a continuous line style where you don't pick the pen up off the paper. And doing that, I was like, oh my God, I finally found this weird edge that I was looking for between figuration and abstraction, where I can do something that is based on reality, but it's like super chaotic and weird, and I loved that. And from there, I started working in that vein. And again, I felt like I was hitting against something. I was making these little like wire sculptures, and I was like, oh, this is brilliant. No one's ever done this before. And then I discovered that like Alexander Calder had done it like 100 years prior. Like exactly the same thing, only better. And so after that, I sort of gave up on doing some new artistic, like physical process that was seemingly authentic and original, because it just wasn't interesting to me.
Yeah.
You know, that was more like me I had to unlearn that was what I needed to do. That was what I was being taught in school, was you need to find a unique working process. If you need to like put gravel into your clay and then set it on fire and then send it to India and then do that, and you know, it's like, this was the vibe that I got from it for a while. I've been meaning to make a comic about it for a while, but I haven't. Like how ridiculous like the obsession with process with art teachers too.
Oh, yeah.
It's like it's just so much where they just like I don't really care what it's about or what it looks like, but how did you make it? And it's like, can't you just look at it? You know, I could lie to you. Look at it, and that's the experience.
Yeah.
You know, people are asking in Instagram comments, how did you make this? Tell me exactly so that I can be like you. And I totally get that. I remember being in that headspace and emailing my favorite artists and being like, how did you do this? I want to know how I can do this. And frankly, I think the question you asked, like, how did you get to working like this? Like, what has your life been like? Is a more interesting question than like, what is the style that you develop? Wow, that was a very roundabout answer. But anyway, I eventually found a lot of artists that I liked. And there's this exercise I have students do now where I have them do like sort of a Venn diagram where I have them list their five or more favorite artists and illustrators and start listing aspects of their work that they're attracted to, or just aspects of their work. So, you know, for me, Maurice Sendak, I was really into, and but also Taiyo Matsumoto, who's a really famous indie manga artist, and lots of other artists that I like. Oh, Mobius, you know, or like Miyazaki, you know, and like, oh, you know, they have a lot of nature themes, or they do a lot of hash work, a lot of detail, high contrast, and then eventually you start seeing the same things over and over again. So like there's definitely a light bulb moment for me years ago when I realized that a lot of the work I liked was on paper, like when you break it down into a list, was basically the same. And I just needed to figure out my version of that. So so by the time I was in grad school, and I did my master's thesis, which was this comic called A Walk in the Park. I was using a nib, a dip pen, and I was hatching like crazy. It would take me 6 hours to shade in a full page because I was a nut. I am a nut. And these days I don't do stuff like that as much anymore. I've had tendonitis in my arms off and on. And like at first I was like, how did this happen? Oh, right. This is what I've been doing with my life. I guess it makes sense. But I love stuff like that where you have where everything has feeling and personality and feels alive in an artwork. Like I don't think there's anything better than that in the simple sense. But black and white work really stood out to me. And what's black and white? Comics. Comics are often black and white. So from there I rediscovered comics. As a kid I didn't really read very much, and which is weird. But I had like a copy of a Calvin and Hobbes book and The Far Side, and that was basically it.
Yeah.
So from there I jumped to reading Best American Comics. So it was like a real honor to be. I'm gonna have to reuse that word because it was an honor. I got an honorable mention when Jeff Smith of Bone fame edited Best American Comics. I think it was 2012. I want to say. Anyway, he wrote me like a really nice note, which was pretty cool. He said he said he was like, he's like, if Van Gogh were an accountant, this is what he would have made. I was like, which like he completely nailed weirdly what the story was and what the style was. I had someone refer to it as like my Van Gogh style.
Yeah.
Which I think is, I can't remember what's that film term for the way that people refer to crosses like that, where they're combining two things. I can't remember. But a lot of stuff that people think of as new, to get back to the idea of style here, it's really just a combination of two old things that are like plunked together in a new way. So that to me is illustration in a nutshell. It's like you're taking a couple of things, here's a businessman, here's a ladder, businessman going up the ladder. It's about the stock market. So creative.
Well, I'm kind of curious too, like maybe I guess like why would say a AD or art director kind of choose like an illustration over say a photo image? I'm curious between that relationship. Is it just more kind of metaphorical and as an illustration comparatively to a direct image or like a photograph, or I'm kind of curious why now, like say like the New Yorker, that illustrations are still prominent throughout our publications, our advertising in corporate America as well. So I'm curious why that is, I guess.
That's a great question. Photography is stupid. No, I'm just kidding. Illustration, no, but illustration is just capable of so much more in some ways. I think that there are reasons to use photography for sure, especially with journalism. You never want to put some kind of romanticized illustration next to a gruesome murder report or something like that. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But if the writing is more editorialized, then I think the art should be too. And it'll draw people in if they see something that is handcrafted, painterly, whatever. If it's illustration, that draws them in immediately. Like it blows my mind routinely that I look at store shelves and it's just like crappy looking text on a label instead of something illustrated. Like it would cost you, I'm not, look, we don't ask for much. Let me put it that way. As illustrators, our fees have sort of they sort of flatlined in the 70s.
Yeah.
And the slow death of print, or whatever you want to call it, has obviously not helped. Illustration art is usually the first thing to get cut. But I just think it has such a potential for a level of expression that you can't have otherwise visually. you can do anything in a drawing, painting, whatever kind of illustration, collage. You can depict, you can use abstract shape. You can mess with the shapes, the color, every aspect of the visual in a way that is not possible in photography. Photography is for conveying real moments. Illustration, to me, is for conveying something invisible in the text and showing a side of it that people wouldn't get otherwise.
Well, that's what I love about like illustrations, or even just painting or fine art painting. I love the nuances and the detail of the line, and I observe, just that even the gritty detail of a line or ink, if you use actual ink, or a brush stroke, that they'll add that like personal expression to, say, an image. It's that detail you get from pen and ink, or physical materials. So that kind of also wraps into a question I kind of had too, in regarding like digital processing, and B, kind of creating pen and paper. So how do you incorporate the, say like a Wacom or something, and then how do you transfer your actual sketches to the digital, and then to final stages, I guess? But or do you work digitally, or do you?
How do I go?
I'm sorry, I've kind of gone.
No, I get the question. I used to work usually analog to digital, where I would sketch, do a thumbnail or a preliminary sketch in pencil, and then take it to a different piece of paper and ink or whatever, and then color digitally. Or I would, for instance, with the Sasquatch in Brooklyn comic I made a few years ago, that got a nice response. I used a layer of, I actually inked in pencil because it was like really in that. I was really into this like funky pencil gritty line that you could get on super toothy paper. And I scanned the pencil pages and then decided that I wanted like a fill behind the line to be an ink wash. So I combined ink and water in various degrees to make it darker and lighter. And then I scanned those two things separately, layered them together in Photoshop, and colorized each layer separately, so that the pencil, the line work was like a dark blue, and the ink wash was like a warm sort of tan hue. And it worked really nicely. I don't ever want to do that pencil thing again though, because it was a nightmare to clean up. Yeah. It was just like the smudging, and the texture of the paper came through when it wasn't dark enough. It's just like, so I used to do a lot of stuff like that, where I was playing around with analog processes and then taking them digital and then cleaning them up in Photoshop. But lately I've been doing more straight to digital. I think for a while that, like I mentioned before, I've always been obsessed with stuff that looks organic, and like sort of lives on the edge of chaos, I guess, while still communicating what it means to communicate. And lately I've been more interested in telling an interesting story than creating an interesting drawing. And so it's been a lot of like writing and behind the scenes work on stuff that may like never see the light of day, unfortunately, but we'll see how these things work. I'm working with a literary agent, Ed Maxwell of Greenberger Associates, to hopefully get some graphic novels and books rolling. But it's a hard game, so we'll see.
I was kind of curious too, like, is there a different headspace or train of thought when you approach, like, say, an illustration project comparatively comics? Or, of course you have the storyline and sequencing with comics, but I was just kind of curious what the difference in headspace, I guess, maybe would be.
I'm sorry, the difference in headspace between comics and what?
Oh, between like just approaching, like you say, an illustration comparatively to a comic.
Yeah. I think with illustrations, you want people's eye to linger on the page longer, usually you want them to sit on that. With comics, you want them to actually, you don't want them to stare at that one panel.
Are you kind of breaking up? Sorry, Jess.
You want them to read at a, you want there to be a rhythm to their experience. You want the bond. So, are you there?
I kind of lost you for
frozen
that
for a
bit.
second.
Yeah, I kind of lost you for a second there.
Okay. My connection is, not to point the finger, my connection is really good.
I have
but hopefully it doesn't happen again.
I have said strong, but then I had like a weak connection.
Yeah.
Who knows?
The funny aspect of life right now is like pointing the Zoom blame. Weird Wi-Fi flex, bro.
That's true.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So what was I talking about? So illustration versus comics. Illustration, I think you want people to, you want the eye to linger. You want people to stay looking at that image. You want them to see the details of it, to take it apart bit by bit. And comics, you want them to actually move from panel to panel and read and have like an almost rhythmic experience to it. I think is something like what I said. So when I'm making illustrations, I go through a lot of iterations, usually with thumbnails and different ideas, and then different compositions of that idea visually, and then revisions. And with comics, it's actually a lot faster in some ways, because in my mind, there's usually only one or two ways to tell a certain story. And once you have the constraints set for that story, visually and narratively, then you just sort of let it channel through you and you just sort of draw it. Illustration, oftentimes, especially when you do more conceptual stuff, where you have like this representing this and this representing that, and whatever, there's often more like I'll do associated word lists, or messing around with the shapes of things and seeing how much I can mess with the shape of something and still have it read as what it is. Whereas in comics, it's more like, okay, these two people are having a conversation. How do I make it so it's not just the two of them on the page like this for like 9 panels? I'm gonna change their hand gestures here and then move them over here and then turn the camera slightly, invisible camera.
Yeah.
And then so that's one aspect of difference between illustration and comics. But also with comics, you have to consider not just the one composition of the page, but the composition of each panel and how they relate. And then also you have to make sure that the story is clear. So a lot of illustrators, when they make their first comics, they don't make any sense, it seems like. It's just a bunch of drawings sort of put together, and they're like, wait, isn't it clear this character is jealous of that other character? And you're like, they were, with this character looking at that character, they're in 2 different panels. There's no relationship in space. What do so there's a whole other set of skills involved in comics, and there are people who are great at comics and terrible at illustration, and vice versa. Just as there are people who are great at drawing realistically who honestly are not that great as illustrators unless they're doing portraits.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, do you find have you what do you find the place nowadays, like with the digital age now, the place still for comics and illustration? I've I've seen, or I've worked with a lot of illustrators and also with digital artists that kind of have to work in HTML5 and work in that realm and create that, and in the clients or in the realm where you add illustration or animation to make the whole overall user experience now, comparatively to say just a comic strip. But what would you say that is there still importance, I guess, in a physical comic strip, or in creating comics and illustrations, I guess?
You mean like a printed or physical image,
I guess so. Yeah. Like, is there
a
still value in
physical
that?
thing
Yeah.
good instead of a digital one?
I guess. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I guess that's where I'm going with that. Yeah. Sorry.
I think so. I think that, I mean, outside of being art objects, there's something to physically flipping the pages of a book that works especially well for certain narratives. I do think that a lot of work that's made digitally is really easy to enjoy digitally. The colors work nicely the way that they pop. Whereas if you were looking at a printed page, those really bright colors are not going to appear the same since they're made out of pigment rather than light.
Mm.
But I do think that there is a value to physical goods that is not going to disappear. It's just going to change.
Yeah.
I think that, yeah, I think in some ways they'll become more valuable. There's going to be a scarcity in some ways, unfortunately, so they will become more valuable. But having physical books is definitely important, especially because you have this object that is committed to this one purpose, as opposed to a smartphone or a computer, where let's say you give your kid a book, they're not gonna, like, they're not gonna use that book for anything else. You give them a tablet and put some books on it, they might just play a game instead. So
Yeah. The
yeah,
attention
that's
span.
a pretty piss poor argument for this, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Let's see. No.
I have a lot more I could say on that, but I don't want to, you know.
Yeah.
Robert,
Yeah. Sorry.
you froze on
Yeah.
me for a second.
Yeah.
Okay, you're.
I'm getting the message. My connection's unstable, but I don't know. It looks strong on my end, but who knows?
Uh-oh.
Oh,
Do you? Okay. Do you want to like reset your Wi-Fi or anything?
I guess no. I'm pretty good at like I still see full bars here. It's just maybe I would have to kind of restart Zoom or something. But I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. I mean, you can take care of it in post, right?
Oh yeah.
It'll be fine.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's kind of what my goal is too. It's just like, well, not goal, just I don't know, just kind of maybe just record these nuances too. I generally don't do too much editing on these interviews. It's just kind of candid, kind of raw conversations, and I just post them. So it's
Okay.
I generally don't with these generally don't do too much production, post production at least, because it's just conversational. I just want to keep it relaxed, like I said before. But I guess like, what do you
Okay.
tell you? Oh, okay. Just to get back into it a bit, if we can, if we're not just frozen in time again or just random space. But
Uh-huh.
like, what do you tell your students like who want to really pursue this as a profession or like you know like any advice or like to kind of help them along to go out in there in the real world and pursue this or um
Sure. First, I tell them they have to really have a love for the game. You can't go into making illustration and comics and expect to be a rock star because there are like, two of those or something. And there's just not a lot of room for, it's a boutique industry. There's not a lot of room for people to casually do this and then make money. You have to be all the way in, not just on the hours you put into your craft, but into hustle. That's most of it is reaching out to people and making people aware of your work, being on social media and not being terrible, which is difficult. And then, but yeah, promoting yourself and finding the best avenues for your work, being honest with yourself about what your strengths and weaknesses are, is really hard. Is a lot of what I tell them if they're truly interested in this stuff. But that doesn't dissuade the ones who are really interested in it. I think it's really frustrating that there's so many academic subjects where students are told nothing. You know, it's just like the course ends and they're like, okay, now this is going to be my subject matter with my life, except that wait, how do I make money doing this? Question mark. You know, it's like it's so hard to figure that out for people. So I really try to go into being practical. I teach them how to make a ledger and stuff like that, usually at the end of my classes, because as long as you live in a capitalist system, in our case, you have to be able to play the game in that way, unless I guess you're like independently wealthy. And a lot of artists are like very fortunate. You know, a lot of us are super privileged and have been able to, you know, go to school and then go to grad school and not be completely in a place where you can't make anything because you just have to be paying the rent.
Yeah. Well, it's also going to ask you, like, how do you manage, you know, teaching? You have your drawing group every month. Fairly recently married as well, and then also the other educational opportunities I've noticed as well. How do you kind of balance everything? And also personal or client projects if they come in, or you know.
I I just sort of get through it somehow. Yeah. I don't know. For a long time there, I think it was 2018 was the year that I realized that I was doing too much. I was teaching more than a full-time teacher, I think, when I figured it out, which seems impossible, because I'm not full-time. I was teaching at 8 different locations for 6 different companies, plus managing a monthly drawing group and a comics festival or 2, and curating an exhibit and doing just lots of things. You know, I was doing like my dad has the saying, you know, it's the school of everything counts, where you just throw a bunch of stuff at the wall and you see what sticks. So I've always pictured myself like some kind of octopus who's just like frantically like pushing things around and seeing what's going to work. And it's only been pretty recently that I was like, okay, let's simplify a little bit here. I'm going to try to teach at only a couple of places. And I had to let some really cool opportunities go because of that, but it was better for my mental health.
Yeah.
With the Brooklyn Draw Jam, which is that monthly drawing meetup, it's a really great collective experience. So all I do is send an email once a month and then show up. And, you know, there are other people who take up the mantle and will like help clean up or set up or do some promo here and there.
Yeah.
It's not like we don't make any money off of it. It's all about, you know, gathering people from the community and drawing together and talking about weird, terrible movies and whatever else comes to mind, and maybe having a beer. So that's a lot of fun. We've been doing it first Mondays for, I think I founded it in 2012, and it's been going on pretty much solidly since then.
Whoa, nice.
But yeah, but like my wife has no idea where I am any given day. It's impossible to keep up with me. It's a problem.
Yeah.
That I am working on, and balancing all of that is a skill. But I think that part of me thrives on that, on being able to bounce around and not have to be stuck in a chair in one place all day, which is actually what it's been for the last 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So I just realized that I've been fine. So maybe I'm lying. It's gotten easier over the years. I've adjusted, but balancing. But this is the balance though. When I was working full time in New York City, I was working 50, 60 hours a week at production facilities or artist studios or galleries. Or wherever I was working, I was just overworked, underpaid, super unhappy. And in my 20s, it was fine to go home at 9 p.m. and make make artwork until 2 a.m. and then get up and go to work. I can't really do that anymore.
Yeah.
I don't want to, and I feel terrible. My body doesn't want to. It's not cool. So now it's like, all right, I'm going to focus. I'm going to be a professor, and I'm going to draw. And that is most of what I do at this point.
Cool.
So it's been really nice to simplify.
Do you envision like in the like any more like, you know, gallery shows or stuff like that, or progressing like in that level, or any, you know, retrospective stuff like that, or what does the future hold for your work?
Personally, for my work, I've been, the way that I think changes by the day, to be honest. Like last month, I was focused on New Yorker style cartoons. I work in bursts, so I sketched maybe 100 cartoons in a month, and I still have to like do finished versions of them to pitch, but and I can't show you, because if I show people, then they can't be published. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But and then comics, it's like I'm doing all this writing and outlining and pitching with my agent, and that's really cool because my mind works a lot in terms of like epic narratives. Like I love stuff like that you can really sink your teeth into, world building. I just like, for a while I couldn't picture myself doing it, and now I'm like dipping my toes in a little bit. So I'm looking forward to doing something like that, which would be, you know, a book, most likely. But I still have ideas for little like web comics. Like I did a series of daily comics a while back, all just 4-panel gags, which were really fun. So my mind bounces from sort of one of those to the other. And then sometimes it's just sort of thinks directly in images, where I just see lines and colors or something, and I'm like, I want to make this. And then, you know, maybe it like disappears before I get it onto paper. But I ping pong from fine art to illustration to comics and back. And I haven't had any ideas for what I'd have a gallery showing of in a little bit. I do have ideas. I just it would have to be the right opportunity for me to, I'm like very picky with my time now. So it would have to be the right opportunity for me to sink my teeth into any given thing. Like it's difficult to choose sometimes because you don't know what the returns are going to be. So I just try to choose the thing that seems like the most fun.
Yeah.
You know, I'm lucky to be at a point, you know, where I can do that. You know, I'm very fortunate. And just sort of like sit down when I get home from teaching and draw whatever I feel. But being disciplined and sticking with one thing for a long time, that's the challenge.
Yeah. Well, any interest in like live action stuff, or creating a series like that, or live action series?
I've had ideas like that. I really don't know very much about making stuff like that, but I had this weird revelation recently. It was very strange. I think when I was younger, I was just, I was so easily embarrassed, and I was like a really shy kid, that I didn't realize that I kind of am a performer in some ways. Like I get up now in front of a classroom, and I like, the jokes just sort of start, the dad jokes just sort of flowing from me. And like, the kids love when I tell stupid jokes that embarrass me. Like it makes them feel more comfortable probably. So, but I had this weird feeling, you know, just a couple of years ago, I was like, am I a funny person? Like not objectively, but like I realized that all of my thoughts were slanting more towards humor, which is very funny, because when I first started making comics, I was very like, comics don't have to be funny. Comics can be serious things for adults, and so can cartoons and puppetry and you know, but it's I don't know if it's like a coping mechanism, or if it's just that it's so fun, or if it's the like, or maybe it's partially just the weird serotonin feedback loop of posting funny things online and getting an immediate response. But I've become more humor oriented with my work, and it's been interesting because it's opened more doorways, at least in my mind, for stuff that could potentially be not necessarily drawing.
Hmm.
That's interesting.
Now, like, how do you continuously tap into that child, like, I guess that childlike, or the I guess the part of the psyche that continues to want to build these worlds, I guess. Like, how do you develop that skill to take, you somebody may have a vision, but they don't always necessarily take that vision and make it happen. And
Right.
how do you tap into that, I guess? Um, or have you developed a method to, I know, tap into it and I don't know, develop it more? Because I feel like I've seen a lot of people struggle with that. Like, oh, I have a great idea, but I just don't have the I guess, skill sets, or um, they just don't take it past idea. So I was just kind of curious, how do you tap into your headspace, um, and continuously doing and enjoying what you do, the craft.
I it's I think it's honestly, whenever people refer to this, their inner child, it's honestly confusing for me. I've never felt separated from that. It's harder for me to not do that.
Yeah.
Like, I think one of the reasons I became a teacher and it felt so natural to me is that I remember very unfortunately well what it was like to be a 12-year-old.
Mm.
You know, between the experiences that were scarring and the ones that were fascinating, like, it's an unforgettable time to be alive. When you're a kid, everything is new and everything is interesting because everything is a first. Even up until the time when you're a teenager, you just don't want to admit it. You want to act like it's cool, and you've experienced, even though it's your first love, you've had, whatever. It's nothing.
Yeah.
And you just try to bounce those emotions off of you, as though you're some kind of I don't know. But anyway, I've felt in touch with that part of myself pretty much constantly. I think that being able, like the second part of your question, being able to take visions from that part of your brain and execute them is the harder part, for sure. As a lot of people have said, ideas are cheap.
Yeah.
I was watching, there's this fantasy author, Brandon Sanderson, and he put his BYU classes online for everyone to watch, his creative writing classes. And he gave an example. He was like, in order to prove that ideas are cheap, this other writer whose name is going to escape me, someone challenged him to make a series of books. Uh-oh. That was weird. Did you hear that?
Yeah. Oh.
I said the word series, and Siri, stop. God.
Oh, was that Siri? Oh, geez.
I have no idea what that was either. I have 3 devices. Well, that is horrifying. I have no idea what's happening. I don't know what device it's coming from.
Oh, geez.
I don't know what application it's coming from.
Oh, no.
I feel haunted. I feel digitally haunted.
Yeah.
So there's the story.
Cool. Oh.
But what was I saying? So I think that but the point was, so this author decided to make, someone was like, oh, I bet you couldn't make something that mashes up the idea of Pokemon with the Roman Legion. And he went and did it and made millions of dollars making a series of books about that, basically mashed up the two concepts of having magical creature friends and being a legionnaire.
Oh, cool.
So the idea is that premises it's great to have a good premise, but it's more important to execute well. And that is the hard part for me and for most people, I think.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I think we can wrap up. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I guess the only thing is, if I could, I've been trying to capture, I generally my series on contaminated sound, I go backstage generally and capture artists prior to, say, performances, and now with the Zoom, I've been trying to capture them in this realm, like in this Zoom realm. If I could take a few snaps right now, which
Sure.
there's no depth, but maybe like when this is over, maybe blow them up for exhibit or something. I don't know, just a critique on how we were, communicating
Okay.
times. But who knows?
Well, I'll let you know when I'm back in Brooklyn also when this is all over, but who knows when that'll be.
Yeah, yeah. Who knows, man?
All right.
But
I'm gonna take this out actually.
yeah.
I don't want to be haunted by digital music.
And I guess we can wrap, sir. And thank you so much for your time. And
Sorry.
hopefully everybody is safe and sound. And yeah, keep on illustrating. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I'm yeah. Well,
Thanks so much, Rob.